The morning sun crept through the blinds of a modest but inviting kitchen in a quiet neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky. The James family home was small and worn, with laminate counters that bore decades of scratches and cabinets whose paint was starting to chip, but it radiated warmth. In the corner, a potted fern thrived under the tender care of Belinda James, a single mother who'd worked tirelessly to build this haven for her twin daughters. 16-year-old Maya James sat at the kitchen table, her pencil gliding across her sketchpad. Her dark curls were a cloud around her face as she added delicate shading to the fruit bowl centerpiece in front of her. Across the table, her twin sister Mia was immersed in her chemistry textbook. Though they shared the same almond-shaped eyes and dimpled smiles, their personalities couldn't have been more different. Maya was the dreamer, constantly lost in her art, while Mia was precise, pragmatic, and rarely seen without a study guide. "Girls, breakfast is ready," Belinda called softly, her voice tinged with exhaustion as she stirred oatmeal on the stove. She adjusted her well-worn uniform, preparing for her shift at the family diner a few blocks away. Despite her fatigue, her smile was warm, though her eyes held a shadow of worry she didn't dare voice. "Just let me finish this highlight," Maya murmured, leaning in closer to her sketch. "You always say that," Mia quipped without looking up. "And then you add another, and then we're sprinting to school." Belinda turned, bowls in hand. "Books and pencils down. Eat first, dream later," she said, placing the oatmeal in front of her daughters. She added a sprinkle of cinnamon, a touch that had comforted them since they were little. The girls obeyed, though Maya managed one last flourish before tucking her sketchbook into her bag. The quiet clinking of spoons filled the air as they ate, the hum of morning traffic filtering in from the street outside. As they walked to school later, the crisp spring air carried the scent of blooming flowers. Maya stopped suddenly, pointing across the street. "Look, the mural's been updated again." Her face lit up at the vibrant new colors added to a nearby wall. Mia glanced briefly before rolling her eyes. "Trust you to notice every new coat of paint. Meanwhile, I'm mentally running through the periodic table." "And that's why you're the genius and I'm the artist," Maya teased, looping her arm through her sisters as they crossed the street. "You mean scattered artist?" Mia shot back with a laugh. "Someone has to keep you focused." They arrived at Central High School, blending into the swarm of students. In their shared homeroom, Ms. Davenport, a young teacher with an infectious enthusiasm, stood at the front. She waited until the noise died down before addressing the class. "Good morning, everyone. I have an exciting announcement," she began, her voice bright with anticipation. "This semester, we're diving into a special project called The Family Tapestry." She wrote the title on the whiteboard in neat script. Maya's curiosity was immediately piqued. She leaned forward, her creative mind already spinning possibilities. Mia, ever the planner, tilted her head thoughtfully. "The goal," Ms. Davenport continued, "is to explore your family's history. This can include interviews, photo albums, even DNA testing if you're interested. By the end, you'll present a detailed narrative about your heritage. It's a chance to discover the stories that make your family unique." The room buzzed with excitement. Maya's hand shot up. "Can we do a creative presentation, like a mural or a photo collage?" "Absolutely," Ms. Davenport replied with a smile. Mia, sitting beside her, frowned slightly. Something about the mention of DNA testing unsettled her, though she couldn't put her finger on why. By the time Maya and Mia returned home that afternoon, the project was all they could talk about. The front door creaked open, and they were greeted by the smell of apple slices and peanut butter, their usual after-school snack. Belinda was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. Her expression softened as her daughters bounded in, their excitement filling the small house. "Mom, guess what?" Maya exclaimed, dropping her bag on the floor. "We got this amazing new school project." Belinda raised an eyebrow, already accustomed to Maya's endless enthusiasm. "What's this one about?" "It's called The Family Tapestry," Mia explained, carefully pulling a project handout from her backpack. "We're supposed to dig into our family history and create a presentation about our heritage." Belinda's smile faltered ever so slightly, a flicker of unease passing across her face. "That sounds Interesting, she said, her voice hesitant. There's a lot you could explore. Your Aunt Tracy might have some stories to share. We were thinking bigger, Maya said, her eyes shining. What if we did one of those DNA tests? Ms. Davenport said they're really accurate now. We could learn so much more than just stories, like where our ancestors came from and stuff. The knife in Belinda's hand slipped slightly against the apple she was slicing. Her movements became slow, deliberate. A DNA test? She repeated, her voice carefully neutral. Yeah. Maya nodded enthusiastically. It's super easy, and we've been saving our allowance. If we split the cost, it's totally doable. Belinda turned to face them, her hands gripping the counter behind her. You don't need to spend money on something like that, she said, her tone firmer than intended. There are other ways to make your project special. Old photos, family stories. Mom, Mia interjected, her perceptive gaze narrowing. Why does the idea bother you? Is there something about our family history we don't know? No, Belinda said quickly, her voice a little too sharp. She took a deep breath, forcing a smile. I just don't want you wasting money on something unnecessary. The twins exchanged a glance. Maya's excitement had dimmed slightly, but her determination remained. We'll think about it, she said, though she was already picturing the moment they'd get the test results in her head. Later that night, the sisters sat in their shared bedroom, the soft glow of their desk lamp illuminating the small space. Maya had pulled up a DNA testing website, its homepage featuring smiling families and promises of deep ancestral insights. This one looks legit, Maya said, pointing at the screen. It's affordable and it includes cool extras like a heritage map. Mia leaned over her sister's shoulder, reading the details. It does seem thorough, she admitted. And they're having a discount. But are we sure about this? What's the harm? Maya asked, her voice brimming with excitement. It's not like we're committing a crime. Plus, think about how much cooler our project will be compared to everyone else's. Mia hesitated, glancing toward the closed door. She thought about their mom's reaction, the way her hands had trembled ever so slightly while slicing apples. Something wasn't adding up. I'll order them, Maya said, sensing her sister's reluctance. You don't have to do anything except spit in a tube when they arrive. Mia sighed, finally relenting. Fine, but if Mom finds out, you're taking the heat. Deal, Maya said with a grin, clicking the Order Now button. A few days later, the package arrived. Maya spotted it first in the mailbox, letting out an excited squeal as she ran inside. Mia, they're here. Mia appeared in the doorway, adjusting her glasses. Already? That was fast. The twins tore into the box with the eagerness of kids opening Christmas presents. Inside were 2 identical kits, each containing a small plastic tube, a cotton swab, and a set of instructions printed on glossy paper. Okay, Mia said, reading the pamphlet. Step 1. No eating or drinking for 30 minutes before collecting the sample. Step 2. Swab the inside of your cheek for 30 seconds. Step 3. Seal the tube and send it back. Simple enough, Maya said, already setting a timer on her phone. From the hallway, Belinda stood silently, her knuckles white as she gripped the doorframe. She wanted to stop them, to snatch the kits away and destroy them, but her voice wouldn't come. All she could do was watch as her daughters laughed and joked, oblivious to the storm that was about to engulf their lives. That evening, after carefully following the instructions, the twins sealed their samples in the provided envelopes and placed them by the door, ready for the morning mail. As they settled into bed, Maya whispered, "What do you think we'll find out?" "Maybe we're royalty or descended from pirates," Mia smirked. "Or maybe we're just 2 ordinary girls from Kentucky." Maya laughed softly, but her excitement kept her awake long after her sister's steady breathing filled the room. The following week dragged on like molasses. Every day after school, Maya raced to the computer to check her email. Mia, ever the pragmatist, scolded her sister for being so impatient. "They said it could take up to 10 business days," Mia reminded her, rolling her eyes as Maya refreshed her inbox for the 5th time that afternoon. "I know, but I've got a feeling," Maya replied, her eyes glued to the screen. Like, today's the day. I can sense it. You said that yesterday, and the day before, Mia muttered, shaking her head. Belinda moved around the kitchen, her movements mechanical as she prepared dinner. She jumped every time a notification chimed from the girls' phones. Though she tried to act casual, her nervous energy filled the room like static electricity. On the 8th day, Maya's laptop finally chimed with an incoming email. She gasped, her eyes widening. Mia, the results are here. Mia dropped her pen, abandoning her homework as she joined her sister at the desk. Are you serious? Maya clicked on the email and her hand trembled as the web page loaded. 2 separate reports appeared, one for each of them. Let's look at them together, Maya suggested, her voice tight with anticipation. Fine, Mia agreed, though her stomach churned with a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. They opened Maya's results first. The screen displayed a colorful ancestry map, breaking down her DNA into neat percentages. West African roots were prominent, alongside European ancestry and traces of Native American heritage. It was exactly what they'd expected, given the stories they'd heard from their mom and extended family. This is so cool, Maya exclaimed, scrolling through the detailed report. Look, it even shows the specific regions our ancestors came from. But her enthusiasm faded when she glanced at Mia's report. Her sister's face had gone pale, her hand frozen on the mouse. What's wrong? Maya asked, her voice rising with concern. Mia's results were nothing like Maya's. Instead of the familiar West African and European roots, the report showed a predominantly South Asian ancestry, but what stood out even more was a red banner at the top of the page. Important. Genetic anomaly detected. Medical attention recommended. This has to be a mistake, Mia whispered, her voice trembling. How can we have completely different results? We're twins. Maya leaned closer, her eyes darting across the screen. There's no way this is right. Maybe the lab mixed up your sample with someone else's? Mia shook her head, her mind racing. They scanned the barcodes. It's almost impossible to mix things up. Before they could process what they were seeing, Belinda appeared in the doorway, her face ashen. What's going on? She asked, her voice sharp with alarm. Maya turned the laptop toward their mother, pointing at the screen. Mom, look at this. Mia's results are totally different from mine, and it says there's a genetic anomaly. Belinda's hand flew to her mouth as her knees seemed to buckle beneath her. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. No, no, no. Mom, what's going on? Mia demanded, standing up. Why would our DNA be so different? And what's this anomaly? Belinda backed away, shaking her head violently. Delete it, she said, her voice trembling. Delete the email. Forget you ever saw it. What? Maya exclaimed. Why? What aren't you telling us? Please, Belinda begged, tears streaming down her face. Just delete it, you don't understand. Then help us understand, Mia shouted, her usual calm shattered. But Belinda turned and fled down the hallway, slamming her bedroom door shut. That night, the house was eerily quiet. Belinda hadn't come out of her room since their confrontation, leaving the girls to fend for themselves. In their shared bedroom, Maya sat cross-legged on her bed, clutching her sketchbook. But for once, the blank page stared back at her untouched. Mia paced the room, her mind churning with possibilities. This doesn't make any sense, Mia said, breaking the silence. Even if we were half-sisters or something, our DNA wouldn't be this different. And what about the anomaly? What does that even mean? Maya looked up, her brow furrowed. Do you think Mom's hiding something about where we came from? Mia stopped pacing, her face grim. I don't know. But we need answers. What about Dr. Patel? Maya suggested. He's been our doctor since we were born. Maybe he can explain the anomaly. Mia nodded slowly. It's worth a shot. But Mom can't know we're going. The next afternoon, after school, the twins rode their bikes to Dr. Patel's clinic. The familiar building felt strangely ominous as they walked inside. Dr. Patel greeted them warmly, though his expression turned serious as they explained the situation and handed him the DNA reports. An anomaly, he murmured, adjusting his glasses as he studied the documents. His usual calm demeanor faltered as he read further. This is unusual. What does it mean? Mia asked, her voice steady but urgent. Dr. Patel hesitated, glancing between the girls. I'd like to run some blood tests to confirm these findings. Would that be okay? Maya and Mia exchanged a glance before nodding. The blood draw was quick and routine, but the atmosphere in the room was anything but. Dr. Patel assured them he'd mark the tests as urgent and have the results by the next day. The following afternoon, the twins returned to the clinic, their nerves stretched thin. Dr. Patel met them in his office, his face unusually tense. I've reviewed your results, he began, his voice measured. And I've contacted some colleagues for guidance. There's something unique about your genetic markers, something I've never seen before. Maya's stomach flipped. What does that mean? It means your DNA isn't typical, Dr. Patel said carefully. There are sequences that don't align with normal human genetics. I don't want to alarm you, but I've had to report this to the appropriate authorities for further analysis. Mia's jaw dropped. Authorities? Why? Because your genetic profile raises questions that go beyond my expertise, Dr. Patel said, his tone apologetic but firm. Before the twins could respond, the door to the office swung open. Two men in dark suits entered, their expressions unreadable. Maya and Mia James? One of them asked. We need you to come with us. Maya and Mia instinctively moved closer together, their identical backpacks slung over their shoulders like shields. Excuse me? Mia asked, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. Who are you, and why would we go anywhere with you? The taller of the two men stepped forward, his tone clipped but calm. We're with a special branch of the Department of Homeland Security. You're not in trouble. This is about your safety. Our safety? Maya repeated, her voice trembling. What does that even mean? We haven't done anything wrong. Dr. Patel stood to the side, looking as uncomfortable as the girls had ever seen him. Girls, I think it's best if you listen to them, he said quietly. We're not going anywhere until someone explains what's going on, Mia said firmly, crossing her arms. The second agent, shorter but just as imposing, sighed and exchanged a look with his partner. We can't discuss the details here, he said, but what I can tell you is this. Your DNA contains markers that are of significant interest to national security. Mia blinked, her analytical mind racing. Markers? What does that even mean? The agents didn't answer. Instead, the taller one gestured toward the door. Please, come with us. We'll explain everything once we're in a secure location. Maya glanced at Mia, her wide eyes silently pleading for guidance. Mia hesitated, her heart pounding. She didn't trust these men, but the seriousness in their voices made it clear they weren't bluffing. Fine, Mia said at last. But if this is about our DNA, we're bringing our results with us. The taller agent nodded. Understood. The car ride was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional static from the agent's radios. Maya and Mia sat in the back seat, their hands tightly clasped. The cityscape blurred past them, eventually giving way to quieter streets and industrial buildings. They arrived at a nondescript facility surrounded by high fences and security cameras. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows. The twins were led to a small room furnished with a table, 2 chairs, and a water cooler in the corner. Wait here, one of the agents instructed before leaving, the door locking with a soft click behind him. This is insane, Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. We're just kids. How are we a national security risk? Mia shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. I don't know, but whatever this is, it's big. They didn't have to wait long. A woman entered the room, her tailored suit and polished demeanor standing in stark contrast to the twins' rumpled school clothes. She carried a folder under one arm and smiled warmly, though her eyes were sharp. "Good evening, Maya and Mia," she said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from them. "I'm Detective Carla Evans. I know this must be incredibly confusing and frightening, but I'm here to help." Maya leaned forward, her voice rising in frustration. "If you want to help, then tell us what's going on. Why are we here? Why are we being treated like criminals?" Carla raised a hand, her expression softening. "I promise you're not in any trouble, but your DNA contains markers that are highly unusual. We've never seen anything like it." "Unusual how?" Mia demanded, her logical mind desperate for clarity. Carla hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Your genetic profiles include sequences that don't match anything in the human genome database. It's as if parts of your DNA were engineered." The room fell silent. Maya and Mia stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in like lead. "Engineered?" Maya echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Carla nodded. "We're still trying to understand the implications, but it's possible your DNA was altered before you were born. This isn't something that could happen naturally." Mia's mind raced. "Are you saying someone tampered with our DNA? Who would do that? And why?" Carla folded her hands on the table. "That's what we're trying to find out, but there's more. The markers in your DNA match sequences flagged in a classified government program, one that was shut down years ago." "What kind of program?" Mia pressed. Carla sighed. "I'm afraid most of the details are classified, but what I can tell you is this. The program involved genetic research that was far ahead of its time. It's possible your mother knows more than she's told you." Meanwhile, back at the James house, Belinda sat in the darkened living room, her head in her hands. The photograph she'd hidden for years lay on the coffee table, its edges worn from the countless times she'd unfolded and refolded it. In the image, a much younger Belinda stood in a sterile laboratory, flanked by men and women in white coats. Her expression was tight, her smile forced. The words scrawled on the back haunted her. "They must never know." A knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. She hesitated before opening it, her heart sinking when she saw 2 more agents standing on her porch. "Mrs. James?" one of them asked. "We need to talk about your daughters." Back at the facility, Carla continued to question the twins, her tone gentle but probing. "When you were growing up, did your mother ever mention participating in any kind of medical study or experimental program?" Maya shook her head. "Number, she's never talked about anything like that." Mia frowned. "She did act weird when we mentioned the DNA test, though, like she didn't want us to take it." Carla nodded, jotting something in her notebook. "That fits with what we suspect. It's possible your mother was part of a program without fully understanding what it entailed. She might have even been coerced into it." Maya's stomach turned. "You think someone experimented on her? Or on us?" Before Carla could answer, the door opened and one of the agents stepped inside. He leaned down, whispering something in her ear. Carla's expression hardened, and she stood abruptly. "Wait here," she said, her tone clipped. "I'll be back shortly." As the door closed behind her, Maya and Mia exchanged a glance, their fear growing with every passing second. The stark room felt colder once Detective Evans left. Maya hugged her knees to her chest, glancing around as if the blank walls might suddenly offer answers. Mia, ever the problem solver, leaned forward on the table, her analytical mind desperate to find a thread of logic in this tangled mess. "This doesn't make sense," Mia said, her voice low but firm. "If Mom knew something about this experiment or whatever it was, why wouldn't she tell us? Why let us take the test in the first place?" Maya bit her lip, her mind racing. "Maybe she didn't think we'd find anything, or she thought it wouldn't matter anymore." Mia's jaw tightened. "It matters now. Whatever they did to us, whoever they are, has turned our lives upside down." Maya's gaze dropped to the table, her voice barely audible. What if we're not normal?" Mia reached across the table, gripping her sister's hand tightly. "We're still us, Maya, no matter what's in our DNA." Before they could say more, the door opened again. This time, Carla returned, her face grim, followed by a man in a military uniform. His presence filled the room with a weight the twins couldn't explain. "This is Colonel Davis," Carla said, her tone measured. "He's been overseeing the investigation into the genetic anomalies flagged in your DNA." Colonel Davis gave a curt nod. "Mia, I understand this is overwhelming, but it's critical that you cooperate with us fully. The markers in your DNA are linked to an experiment called Project Genesis, a classified genetic program from over 15 years ago." "Project Genesis?" Mia repeated, her brow furrowing. "What was it?" Davis hesitated, his posture stiff. "The details of the project are classified, but I can tell you this. Its purpose was to explore genetic engineering to enhance human capabilities. Faster reflexes, higher intelligence, stronger immune systems. The program was shut down after a series of failures." Maya's eyes widened. "Failures? Like what?" "Many of the subjects didn't survive," Davis said bluntly. "But according to your DNA profiles, you and your sister are anomalies, exceptions to what we believed was possible." "Wait," Mia interjected, her voice sharp. "Are you saying we're part of this project? That we were engineered?" Davis nodded. "It's likely. The genetic markers in your DNA match records from Genesis. That's why we brought you here, to ensure your safety and to investigate how this could have happened without our knowledge." Maya felt her stomach twist. "And our mom? Does she know about this?" Carla answered, her voice softer. "We believe your mother might have been involved in some way, but whether she participated willingly or not, we can't say yet. She's being questioned as we speak." In another part of the facility, Belinda sat in a sterile interrogation room, her hands clasped tightly on the table. The photograph from her living room sat in front of her, a painful reminder of the choices she'd made all those years ago. "Mrs. James," the agent across from her began, his tone neutral, "we've reviewed records linking you to a government program called Project Genesis. You worked as a research assistant in the early stages, correct?" Belinda nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I worked in the lab, but I didn't know what they were really doing. Not at first." "And when you found out?" Belinda's throat tightened. "I tried to leave. I told them I wanted out, but they wouldn't let me. They said I'd signed a contract, that I knew too much." The agent leaned forward. "What exactly did you see, Mrs. James?" Tears welled up in Belinda's eyes as she stared at the photograph. They were experimenting on embryos, altering their DNA before implantation. They wanted to create perfect humans, but the experiments were cruel. Most of the embryos didn't survive, and the ones that did— She trailed off, her voice breaking. The agent's voice softened, though his eyes remained sharp. "And your daughters? Were they part of this?" Belinda hesitated, her shoulders trembling. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know until it was too late. They told me I was a surrogate for a normal pregnancy. They lied to me." Back in the holding room, Colonel Davis continued his explanation, his tone as rigid as his posture. "Project Genesis wasn't just about genetic enhancement. The program had another goal, one we only recently discovered through recovered documents. The altered DNA wasn't entirely human." Maya's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean, not entirely human?" "There are sequences in your DNA," Davis explained, "that don't match any known organism on Earth. The scientists working on Genesis were experimenting with synthetic genomes, combinations of human DNA and entirely new, lab-designed structures." Mia's heart raced as she tried to process this revelation. "So, what does that make us? Are we even human?" "You're human," Carla said quickly, her voice gentle. "But your DNA includes elements that are unique. It's why you're so important. Understanding your genetic makeup could unlock medical advancements or be weaponized in the wrong hands. Weaponized? Maya repeated, her voice trembling. You think someone would hurt us to use our DNA? Colonel Davis's silence was answer enough. Hours later, the twins were escorted to a private dormitory-style room within the facility. Though the space was clean and comfortable, with twin beds and soft lighting, it felt more like a gilded cage than a refuge. Maya sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. This is insane, she whispered. Yesterday we were just normal kids. Now they're saying we're part of some freak experiment? Mia sat cross-legged on her own bed, her analytical mind still racing. We need to figure out what to do next. We can't just sit here and let them control us. They said it's for our safety, Maya said, though her voice lacked conviction. Maybe, Mia replied. But what if there's more they're not telling us? What if they're not just protecting us? They're studying us. A chill ran down Maya's spine. What do you mean? Mia leaned forward, lowering her voice. Think about it. If we're the only successful results from Project Genesis, we're not just anomalies. We're evidence. They won't let us go until they get what they need. Maya swallowed hard, her fingers clutching the edge of her bed. So what do we do? Mia's eyes narrowed with determination. We figure out the truth, and then we decide what happens next. Late that night, the twins lay in their separate beds, their minds far too restless for sleep. The faint hum of the ventilation system and the occasional echo of distant footsteps were the only sounds in the quiet room. Maya turned over, her voice barely above a whisper. Mia, what if they're right? What if we're not normal? Mia stared at the ceiling, her hands clasped tightly on her stomach. It doesn't matter what they think we are, she replied firmly. We're still us. Whatever's in our DNA doesn't change the fact that we're Maya and Mia James. Maya was silent for a moment, then sat up, her curls tumbling around her face. I want to know the truth. About everything. Mom, this Project Genesis. Why they think we're so special. Don't you? Of course I do, Mia said, sitting up as well. But we're trapped in here. They're controlling what we know, what we can do. Until we find a way out of this place, we're stuck playing by their rules. Maya frowned, her artistic imagination sparking an idea. What if we don't play by their rules? What if we find a way to get answers ourselves? Mia raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Maya glanced toward the door. These people may think they're in control, but they're not as untouchable as they seem. They're keeping us in the dark, but we've always been good at figuring things out together. Mia's analytical mind began to catch up with her sister's daring plan. Okay, she said slowly. Let's assume we can find out more. Where do we even start? Maya smirked. By exploring. This place might be secure, but it's not a prison. We've been left alone for hours. There have to be files, computers, something we can use. The next morning, the twins put their plan into action. After breakfast was delivered to their room, along with an apology from Carla for the continued lack of updates, they began to quietly test their boundaries. When the guards weren't looking, they peeked down hallways and memorized the layout of the facility. They noted keypads by certain doors, cameras positioned at strategic angles, and staff members' routines. At lunch, they struck up casual conversations with the medical staff, asking seemingly innocent questions about the facility and its purpose. Most of the answers were vague, but one technician let slip that the facility had a central archive. An archive, Mia murmured to Maya later that afternoon as they pretended to read books in the small recreation area. That's where they're keeping the records. If we can access it, we can find out everything, Maya finished, her eyes gleaming with determination. That night, while the facility was quieter, the twins put their plan into motion. They slipped out of their dormitory, careful to avoid the cameras and guards they'd studied earlier. Maya led the way, her artist's intuition guiding her through the sterile hallways, while Mia carried a notepad filled with their observations. After what felt like an eternity, they found the door labeled Archive. A keypad glowed faintly in the dim light, Of course it's locked, Maya muttered. Mia studied the keypad. There's a way in. We just have to figure it out. Using a trick she'd learned from a science magazine, Mia carefully dusted the keypad with powder from a crumbled aspirin she'd brought along. The faint smudges on certain keys revealed the digits that had been pressed most frequently: 2, 4, 7, and 9. Smart, Maya whispered, impressed. But we don't know the order. Mia's brow furrowed. Let me think. She hesitated, then entered a sequence: 7-4-2-9. The lock beeped, and the door clicked open. Yes, Maya whispered, grinning as they slipped inside. The archive was larger than they'd expected, rows of filing cabinets and computer terminals stretching into the dimly lit room. The air smelled faintly of dust and paper, and the hum of the computers filled the silence. Where do we even start? Maya asked, her voice tinged with awe and anxiety. Mia scanned the room, her mind already forming a plan. Look for anything labeled Genesis or 2008. That's when we were born. Maya nodded and started rifling through a cabinet, while Mia powered on a computer. After an hour of searching, Maya found a thick file labeled Genesis, terminated 2008. She flipped it open, her heart pounding as she skimmed the contents. Hey, she called softly. I think I've got something. Mia hurried over, and together they pored over the documents. The file detailed experiments conducted on embryos, reports of early failures, and the eventual birth of 2 viable subjects in late 2008. Subjects A and B, Maya read aloud, her voice trembling. Born to surrogate number 147. Both subjects exhibit enhanced cognitive and physical capabilities. She looked up at Mia. That's us. Mia pointed to another section. Synthetic genome integration successful. Subjects show no immediate adverse effects, but long-term outcomes remain unknown. What does that even mean? Maya asked, her stomach churning. Mia's eyes narrowed as she scanned further. It means they didn't care what happened to us. They just wanted to see if it worked. They turned the page, and Maya gasped. Tucked into the file was a photograph of a young woman in a lab coat, standing in front of a row of incubators. Her face was unmistakable. Mom, Maya whispered, her voice cracking. She was there, Mia said, her voice hollow. She knew about all of this. Before they could process the revelation, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway outside. Someone's coming, Maya hissed, quickly stuffing the file into her backpack. They barely had time to hide behind a row of cabinets before the door opened, flooding the room with light. A figure entered, their silhouette familiar. It was Carla Evans. She stepped inside, glancing around before spotting the faint glow of the computer screen Mia had forgotten to turn off. I know you're in here, Carla said, her voice calm but firm. Come out, now. Maya and Mia exchanged a panicked glance before stepping out from their hiding spot, their faces defiant despite the fear coursing through them. Carla crossed her arms. What do you think you're doing? Finding the truth, Mia replied sharply. Since no one else will tell us. Carla's expression softened slightly. I get it. You want answers, but this isn't the way. Then what is? Maya shot back. We're tired of being treated like test subjects in a lab. Carla sighed, her shoulders relaxing. I'll make you a deal. You hand over that file and I'll tell you everything I know. Mia hesitated, her grip tightening on her backpack. And if we don't? Carla's eyes met theirs, steady and unwavering. Then things will get a lot harder for you. I'm trying to help you, but you have to trust me. The twins exchanged a long glance. Finally, Maya pulled the file from her bag and handed it over. Good, Carla said, taking it. Now, let's talk. The night cloaked the safe house, and the silence was heavy with tension. Ava and Amara huddled together in a corner of the living room, seeking comfort in each other's presence. Detective Carla Evans stayed close to the door, her gaze fixed on the muddy boot prints she was examining with a small flashlight. What do we do now? Ava asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Finding your mother is our top priority, Carla replied firmly, though her mind churned with the complex variables complicating their situation. Agent Hernandez was at the dining table, his laptop open as he reviewed the grainy footage from the security cameras installed around the perimeter. The video replayed the moment Belinda was dragged into the dark SUV, her silhouette barely visible in the chaos of the ambush. "Here," Hernandez said, pointing to the screen. "The vehicle wasn't fully concealed when it entered the clearing. We've got part of the license plate." Carla moved to his side, studying the footage. "That's something. Can we pull the footage from traffic cameras near the access roads?" Hernandez nodded. "I'll start running it through the database. It'll take a few hours, but we might get lucky." In the corner, Amara's analytical mind churned as she watched the scene unfold. "If they planned this ambush," she said slowly, "then they had to know we were here. That means they've been tracking us." Carla glanced at her, impressed, despite the grim circumstances. "That's a sharp observation. The question is how. Hernandez, check the van for trackers." Ava sat silently, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Her usually bright eyes were dulled with sorrow and guilt. "This is my fault," she murmured. "If I hadn't wanted to do that DNA test, none of this would have happened." "No," Amara said sharply, moving to sit beside her sister. "This isn't your fault, Ava. Mom kept this from us because she wanted to protect us. You couldn't have known." Ava looked down, her hands trembling. "But I pushed for it. I wanted to know the truth so badly, and now she's gone." "She's not gone," Carla said firmly, crouching in front of the twins. "Listen to me. Your mother is a fighter. She escaped these people once before, and she'll hold on until we get her back. But we have to work together. No blame, no guilt. Just focus." Ava wiped her eyes, her sister's steady hand on her shoulder giving her the strength to nod. As the sun crept over the horizon, Carla and Hernandez finalized their plan. The footage from the security camera and the partial license plate were sent to a contact within Homeland Security, a move Carla made cautiously, knowing the risks of involving too many people. "We've got a lead," Hernandez said as he scanned the results. "A warehouse in the industrial district, registered under a shell corporation linked to one of Gupta's old research partners." "Then that's where they're holding her," Carla said, her tone resolute. Ava and Amara, still pale from the previous night's events, stood nearby. "We're coming with you," Amara announced, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "No," Carla replied immediately. "It's too dangerous. You'll stay here with Officer Grant until we return." "But," Ava began, only for Carla to cut her off gently. "No arguments. Your mother would never forgive me if something happened to you." The twins exchanged a glance, but they didn't argue further. They trusted Carla, even if it hurt to be left behind. Later that morning, the SUV carrying Carla, Hernandez, and 2 additional officers arrived near the industrial district. The warehouse loomed in the distance, its rusted exterior and broken windows giving it an air of abandonment. But Carla knew better. She raised her binoculars, scanning the perimeter. "There's a guard near the side entrance, armed. Looks like minimal patrol, but that doesn't mean there aren't more inside." Hernandez nodded, checking his weapon. "We go in quiet. We can't afford a firefight with Belinda inside." The team split into pairs, Carla and Hernandez approaching the warehouse from the north while the others circled around to cover the rear exits. The closer they got, the more signs of activity became evident. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt, faint voices from within the building, and the smell of recently burned fuel. Carla's grip on her weapon tightened. Inside the warehouse, Belinda sat tied to a chair in a small, dimly lit room. Her breathing was shallow, her wrists bruised from the tight restraints. Across from her, a man paced slowly, his dark eyes sharp behind his glasses. "Belinda," he said, his voice calm but laced with menace. "You should have known this day would come. You can't run forever." "Gupta," she rasped, her voice weak but defiant. "You're wasting your time. I won't let you use my daughters." Dr. Rajiv Gupta stopped pacing, crouching in front of her. "Your daughters are miracles, Belinda. Proof that Project Genesis wasn't a failure. Don't you want the world to see what they can do? They're not experiments, Belinda spat, her voice gaining strength. They're my children. Gupta sighed, standing again. You've always been stubborn, but it's irrelevant now. We've already made arrangements to retrieve them. They'll join us soon enough. Belinda's heart raced, but she kept her expression steely. You'll never touch them. Gupta smirked. You don't have a choice. Outside, Carla signaled for Hernandez to follow her lead as they approached a side entrance. Using a small device, she disabled the security camera positioned above the door before easing it open. The warehouse interior was a maze of metal shelves and equipment, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. The faint hum of machinery and muffled voices guided them deeper into the building. Carla's heart pounded as she rounded a corner, her weapon raised. She gestured for Hernandez to take the lead as they moved closer to the source of the voices. Through a cracked door, Carla spotted Belinda tied to a chair, her face pale but her gaze fierce. A man stood over her, his back turned to the doorway. That has to be Gupta, Carla whispered. Hernandez nodded. We'll need to take him quietly. If he calls for backup, we're outnumbered. Carla's jaw tightened. Let's move. Night wrapped around the safe house like a heavy blanket, and the silence was filled with unspoken fear. Ava and Amara sat huddled together in the corner of the living room, wrapped in a thin blanket, their faces pale and tear-streaked. Across the room, Detective Carla Evans crouched near the door, a flashlight illuminating the muddy boot prints left behind by the masked operatives. What do we do now? Ava asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and guilt. Carla didn't look up, her gaze fixed on the floor. First, we figure out where they've taken her. Finding your mother is our top priority. Amara tightened her grip on her sister. But how? They were so fast, so organized, it's like they knew exactly where we were. Carla's jaw tightened. That's what worries me. They shouldn't have been able to track us this quickly. Someone knew you were here. Ava wiped her tears away with her sleeve. You think someone betrayed us? Not necessarily, Carla said, finally standing up and pocketing a small piece of torn fabric she'd found near the door. It could be a tracker or surveillance we missed. These people are well-funded and well-trained. We underestimated their reach. Agent Hernandez, seated at the dining table, was hunched over his laptop, reviewing the grainy footage from the hidden security cameras outside. Officer Grant paced near the window, her rifle still at the ready, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. There, Hernandez said, pointing at the screen. The footage showed the masked operatives dragging Belinda toward a black SUV parked just beyond the tree line. The vehicle's license plate was obscured, but its distinctive rear bumper had a visible dent. They took her north, Hernandez muttered, zooming in on the tire tracks leading away from the property. But they were careful to cover their trail after a few miles. Carla leaned over his shoulder, her brow furrowed in concentration. Run this image through the local traffic cameras. If they stayed on the main roads, we might catch a glimpse of them. Hernandez nodded and began typing furiously. Meanwhile, in their room, Ava and Amara sat on the edge of one bed, the small space feeling more confining than ever. Amara clutched the photograph of their mother with the scientists, her eyes scanning it for details she might have missed. Do you think they'll hurt her? Ava asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara set the photograph down carefully. Number, if she's as important to them as we are, they'll want her alive, at least for now. Ava's lower lip trembled. What if we never see her again? We will, Amara said firmly, though her own voice wavered. We have to. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Carla stepped inside, her expression tired but determined. How are you holding up? We're scared, Ava admitted, but we want to help. Please tell us what we can do. Carla pulled up a chair, sitting across from the twins. You've already helped more than you know. The information you've shared with me, the photograph, and your observations. It's all been crucial. But right now, the best thing you can do is stay safe. Let us handle finding your mom. Amara shook her head. We can't just sit here and do nothing. She's our mom. She'd do anything for us. Carla hesitated, then nodded slowly. I get it. You want to fight for her. And I promise we're doing everything we can to bring her back. But these people, the ones who took her, are extremely dangerous. We need to be smart about how we approach this. Ava wiped her eyes and nodded. Just promise us you won't stop until you find her. I promise, Carla said softly. Hours passed, and the safe house grew quieter as the night deepened. Carla sat at the dining table, her eyes scanning a map marked with potential locations the black SUV could have traveled to. Hernandez had traced the vehicle to an industrial area outside the city, but the trail had gone cold after that. This industrial park is massive, Carla murmured, circling the area on the map. They could be hiding her in any one of these buildings. Or worse, they could have already moved her. Officer Grant entered the room, her expression grim. The perimeter's secure, but there's been movement in the woods, footprints near the eastern side. Someone's scouting us. Carla's stomach dropped. They're not giving up. Should we move them again? Grant asked. Carla considered this, her eyes flicking toward the closed door of the twins' room. We don't have the resources for another relocation right now. We need to hold our ground until we find Belinda. Then we'll reassess. At that moment, in a cold, windowless room miles away, Belinda sat hunched on a metal chair. Her wrists were bound with plastic ties, her face pale and bruised. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and fear. Across from her, a man in a dark suit paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. Mrs. James, the man began, his voice smooth and calculated. You've caused us a great deal of trouble. Belinda's gaze remained fixed on the floor, her lips pressed tightly together. You know why we brought you here, the man continued, leaning forward to meet her eyes. It's time to stop running and face reality. The program was never truly shut down, and now, thanks to your daughter's DNA test, we know exactly where to find what we need. Belinda's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with defiance. You'll never touch them. The man smirked. Oh, Belinda, you're underestimating us. We've already come this far, haven't we? He slid a file across the table, its contents spilling out. Photographs of Ava and Amara, candid shots taken from a distance, likely during their time at the facility. Belinda's breath hitched, but she forced herself to stay calm. We don't want to hurt them, the man said smoothly. Quite the opposite. They're the culmination of years of work, and we need their cooperation to continue. But their compliance depends on you. Belinda shook her head. They'll never help you. The man's smile faded, replaced by a steely glare. We'll see about that. Back at the safe house, Ava awoke with a start. She'd been dreaming of her mother, calling out for her but unable to reach her through the shadows. She sat up, her heart racing, and noticed Amara sitting by the window, staring out into the dark. You couldn't sleep either? Ava asked softly, joining her sister. Amara shook her head. I keep thinking about everything. The lab, the scientists, Mom. It feels like a nightmare we can't wake up from. Ava leaned her head on Amara's shoulder. Do you think we'll ever be normal again? Amara sighed. I don't know. But I do know we're stronger together. Whatever happens, we'll face it as a team. In the morning, Carla called the twins into the living room. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but there was a spark of determination in her eyes. We've got a lead, she said. Hernandez and I are heading to the industrial park where we believe they've taken your mother. It's risky, but it's our best shot at finding her. We're coming with you, Ava said immediately. Carla shook her head. It's too dangerous. You'll stay here with Officer Grant. She'll keep you safe. But, Amara started, but Carla cut her off. No arguments. Your safety is non-negotiable. If anything happens to us, Grant has instructions to get you to another location immediately. Ava and Amara reluctantly nodded, their hearts sinking. We'll bring her back, Carla promised. The unmarked sedan sped down an empty highway toward the industrial park, the early morning fog clinging to the roadside like a veil. Carla Evans sat in the passenger seat, her hands gripping a map tightly. Agent Hernandez drove in tense silence, his eyes scanning the road ahead for any sign of trouble. "This is a long shot," Hernandez muttered. "If they've already moved her, we're chasing ghosts." "It's all we've got," Carla replied firmly. "We can't let this trail go cold." Hernandez nodded, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. Back at the safe house, Ava and Amara sat at the kitchen table with Officer Grant, who was cleaning her firearm methodically. The rhythmic clicking of metal parts being locked into place did little to calm the twins' nerves. "I hate waiting," Ava said, her voice edged with frustration. "I know," Grant replied without looking up, "but waiting is sometimes the safest option." Amara leaned forward, resting her chin on her folded arms. "Safe doesn't mean easy. Not when Mom's out there somewhere and we're stuck here doing nothing." Grant set her weapon down and met their eyes. "You're doing more than you realize. You're staying alive, which gives Carla and Hernandez the chance to do their job. That's no small thing." The industrial park was eerily quiet as Carla and Hernandez pulled up to the perimeter. The sprawling complex of warehouses and loading docks was surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. Hernandez cut the engine and turned to Carla. "We go in quiet. No unnecessary risks." Carla nodded and pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. They exited the car and approached a side entrance, their footsteps muffled by the damp ground. Hernandez crouched by the gate, examining the lock. "New," he muttered. "They've been here recently." Using a small tool from his pocket, he worked the lock until it clicked open. The two slipped inside, keeping close to the shadows. The interior of the warehouse was vast and dimly lit. Rows of metal shelving held stacks of crates, their labels obscured by dust and grime. Carla's flashlight swept across the space, illuminating a pathway toward the back of the building. "Over here," Hernandez whispered, gesturing toward a door marked "Restricted Access." Carla tried the handle, but it was locked. She motioned for Hernandez to step back and then drew a small crowbar from her bag. With a few sharp movements, the door creaked open, revealing a set of stairs leading downward. A chill ran down Carla's spine as she descended, the faint hum of machinery growing louder with each step. At the safe house, Ava sat cross-legged on the couch, her sketchbook open in her lap. Instead of drawing, she stared at the blank page, her pencil unmoving. "Why don't you draw something?" Amara asked, sitting beside her. "It usually helps you calm down." "I can't," Ava admitted, her voice breaking. "Every time I try, all I see is Mom. I keep thinking about what they might be doing to her. What if she's hurt? What if—" "Don't," Amara interrupted, gripping her sister's hand tightly. "Don't let your mind go there. She's strong. She's survived this once before, remember? She'll survive it again." Ava looked at her sister, her eyes shimmering with tears. "I wish I had your confidence." Amara gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You don't need confidence. You've got me, and I've got you. We'll get through this together." Carla and Hernandez reached the bottom of the stairs, finding themselves in a sterile corridor lined with reinforced doors. The hum of machinery was louder here, accompanied by faint voices coming from somewhere ahead. "This is it," Carla whispered, her pulse quickening. Hernandez motioned for her to follow as they crept toward the sound. At the end of the hallway, they found a windowed observation room overlooking a larger lab space. Inside, several people in lab coats moved between rows of equipment, their faces obscured by masks. In the center of the room, strapped to a gurney, was Belinda. Carla's breath caught in her throat as she saw the woman lying motionless, her wrists restrained and wires attached to her arms. Hernandez pulled out his phone and snapped a quick photo. "We need to move now," Carla said, her voice urgent. "Not yet," Hernandez replied, scanning the room. "There's too many of them. We need a distraction." Carla's eyes darted around the observation room, landing on a control panel near the window. "This might do it," she said, approaching the console. She pressed a series of buttons, and suddenly, alarms blared throughout the lab. The scientists inside scrambled, their movements frantic as red lights flashed overhead. "Let's go!" Hernandez shouted, kicking the door open. Belinda stirred weakly as Carla and Hernandez rushed into the lab. Her eyes fluttered open and she gasped when she saw them. "Carla?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's okay," Carla said, unstrapping her restraints. "We've got you. You're safe now." Hernandez covered them, his weapon trained on the retreating scientists who had abandoned their stations in the chaos. "We need to move now," Hernandez barked. Carla helped Belinda to her feet, supporting her as they made their way back toward the stairs. The alarms continued to blare, and the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridors. "They're coming," Hernandez warned, glancing over his shoulder. "Almost there," Carla said, gritting her teeth as she half-carried Belinda up the stairs. They burst out into the open air, the early morning light casting long shadows across the industrial park. Hernandez led the way to the sedan, scanning the area for any sign of pursuit. "Go! Go! Go!" he shouted as Carla helped Belinda into the back seat. They sped away, the lab fading into the distance behind them. Hours later, back at the safe house, Ava and Amara jumped to their feet as the sedan pulled into the driveway. Carla stepped out first, her clothes disheveled but her expression triumphant. The twins rushed forward as Hernandez helped Belinda out of the car. "Mom!" Ava cried, throwing her arms around her. Belinda hugged her daughters tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I'm okay." Amara joined the embrace, her usually composed demeanor breaking as she sobbed into her mother's shoulder. Carla watched the reunion silently, a wave of relief washing over her. For now, the James family was together again. The safe house was quiet that evening, the relief of Belinda's return tempered by the knowledge that they were far from safe. The James family sat together on the couch, holding hands as if afraid to let go. Ava leaned into her mother's side while Amara sat stiffly, her analytical mind still processing the events of the day. Carla stood near the window, her gaze fixed on the darkening woods outside. Hernandez and Officer Grant were nearby, reviewing the surveillance footage and discussing next steps in hushed tones. "We can't stay here much longer," Hernandez said, keeping his voice low. "They'll come looking for her again. We need a new location." "I know," Carla replied, her arms crossed tightly. "But we need time to regroup and figure out our next move. Moving too soon could leave us vulnerable." Belinda looked up from the couch, her voice soft but firm. "They won't stop, you know that, don't you? They've been after us for 16 years. They won't rest until they have what they want." "What exactly do they want?" Amara asked, her tone sharp. "Is it us? Or is it something else?" Belinda hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "It's you," she admitted. "Your DNA. They see you as the key to finishing what they started." "They don't care about us," Amara said bitterly. "They care about their experiments." Belinda shook her head. "You're more than that to me. You always have been. I ran because I couldn't let them take you, couldn't let them use you for their twisted goals." Ava squeezed her mother's hand. "You did what you had to do, Mom. We know you love us." Carla turned from the window, her voice cutting through the room. "And we're going to make sure they never get the chance to hurt you again. But to do that, we need answers. Belinda, I need you to tell me everything you know about Project Genesis. No more holding back." For the first time since her capture, Belinda opened up fully. Sitting at the kitchen table, she recounted her time working as a research assistant in the early days of Project Genesis. "It started as a fertility program," she explained. "That's what they told us, at least. Helping couples who couldn't conceive naturally. But it didn't take long to realize that wasn't the whole truth." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she continued. "They were experimenting on embryos, manipulating their DNA to create enhancements, intelligence, physical strength, immunity to diseases. They wanted to build perfect humans." Ava and Amara exchanged horrified glances. "They said it was for the greater good," Belinda said, her voice breaking, "that it would revolutionize medicine and science. But the experiments were cruel, and most of the embryos didn't survive. Those that did, well, they weren't always Stable. Carla leaned forward, her brow furrowed. And you? How did you become a surrogate? I thought I was volunteering for a standard IVF program, Belinda said bitterly. I was young, desperate for money. It seemed like an easy way to help people and get paid for it. But after I became pregnant, I started noticing things. Tests they weren't explaining, medical terms I didn't understand. When I asked questions, they brushed me off. What happened when you found out the truth? Amara asked, her voice quiet but firm. I tried to leave, Belinda said, tears spilling down her cheeks, but they told me I'd signed a contract that I couldn't back out. Then I overheard them talking about the final phase of the project, about what they were planning to do with the babies after they were born. That's when I knew I had to run. Carla nodded grimly, taking in every detail. And Dr. Gupta? What was his role in all of this? Belinda hesitated, her face clouding with a mix of emotions. He was the lead scientist, but he wasn't like the others. He cared about the babies, about you. I think he wanted to protect you, but he was trapped, just like I was. They had something on him, something that kept him in line. Do you think he's still involved? Carla asked. I don't know, Belinda admitted. He disappeared not long after I ran. I always hoped he'd found a way to escape, too. Carla glanced at Hernandez, who was jotting down notes. We need to find him. If he's still alive, he could be the key to shutting this down for good. That night, the safe house was on high alert. Hernandez and Officer Grant took shifts patrolling the perimeter, while Carla pored over the Project Genesis files late into the night. Belinda and the twins slept fitfully, their dreams haunted by shadowy figures and cold laboratories. In the early hours of the morning, Carla's phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Agent Luis Hernandez, her contact in the Archives Division. Found something. Location matches your target. Forwarding now. Be careful. Carla opened the attachment, her eyes widening as she scanned the document. It was a record of a facility owned by a shell company tied to Project Genesis. The address matched the industrial park they'd just left, but there was a second location, a remote compound deep in the woods, far from prying eyes. She woke Hernandez immediately, showing him the file. This is it, she said. This is where they're operating now. Hernandez nodded. We'll need backup. This isn't something we can handle on our own. Carla frowned. The more people we involve, the greater the risk of leaks. We can't trust just anyone with this. Hernandez sighed. Then we're going in with a skeleton crew. But if things go south, we're on our own. The next morning, Carla gathered the James family in the living room. She explained the plan to infiltrate the compound, leaving out some of the more dangerous details to avoid alarming them further. You're staying here, she said firmly, looking at Ava and Amara. But what if something happens to you? Ava asked, her voice rising with fear. Nothing's going to happen, Carla said, forcing a reassuring smile. You're my priority. As long as you're safe, we can handle the rest. Amara nodded slowly, though her eyes betrayed her unease. Just come back. All of you. Carla placed a hand on her shoulder. We will. I promise. By mid-afternoon, Carla and Hernandez were en route to the compound, accompanied by 2 additional agents who had been vetted for the mission. The drive was long and tense, the dense forest swallowing the road as they neared their destination. This place is isolated, one of the agents remarked, checking the GPS. Perfect spot for illegal operations. Let's hope it also means we can catch them off guard, Carla replied, her jaw set. The team parked a mile from the compound and continued on foot, moving silently through the trees. When they reached the perimeter, Carla signaled for them to stop. The compound was larger than they'd expected, surrounded by a high fence topped with razor wire. Armed guards patrolled the area, their movements precise and coordinated. Looks like they're expecting company, Hernandez muttered. Carla nodded, her mind already working through a plan. We'll split into 2 teams. Hernandez and I will create a distraction while you 2 secure the entrance. Once we're inside, we focus on finding any evidence and shutting this operation down. The agents nodded, and the team moved into position, their breaths steady despite the tension. The forest was dense and quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves as Carla and her team moved into position. The compound loomed ahead, its chain-link fence shimmering faintly under the midday sun. Hernandez motioned toward a clearing near the northern perimeter, where two guards stood chatting idly, their rifles slung over their shoulders. "We'll hit them here," Hernandez whispered. "Quick and clean." Carla nodded, signaling the other two agents to flank the guards. The team moved with practiced precision, spreading out to create a triangular formation. One of the guards lit a cigarette, oblivious to the figures closing in on them. Hernandez struck first, his silenced weapon knocking the man unconscious before he could react. The second guard spun around, but Carla was already behind him, delivering a swift blow to the back of his neck. "Clear," Hernandez said, lowering his weapon. The team dragged the unconscious guards into the underbrush, securing their hands and feet with zip ties before continuing toward the compound. Inside the compound, the air was thick with the hum of machinery and the faint hiss of pressurized air escaping from vents. Carla and Hernandez crept through a narrow corridor, their flashlights cutting through the dim light. "This place is bigger than we thought," Hernandez muttered, his voice barely audible. Carla paused at a doorway, peering inside. The room was filled with medical equipment, incubators, gene sequencers, and rows of labeled vials. Her stomach churned as she realized the labels bore names and numbers, subjects, not people. "This is it," Carla whispered. "This is where it all started." Hernandez scanned the room, his expression grim. "They're still experimenting. Look at this, fresh samples." Carla's eyes landed on a clipboard hanging from one of the machines. She snatched it up, flipping through the pages. The notes were detailed, documenting genetic sequences and experimental procedures. "This isn't just research," Carla said, her voice shaking. "This is active development. They're using this to perfect whatever they started with." Genesis Hernandez pointed to a name scribbled at the top of the clipboard. "Dr. Rajiv Gupta." "He's here," Hernandez said. "We need to find him." Back at the safe house, the atmosphere was tense. Ava and Amara sat at the dining table with Officer Grant, who was monitoring a handheld radio. The occasional static crackle was the only sound in the room. "Do you think they've found anything yet?" Ava asked, her voice small. Grant glanced at the twins, her expression unreadable. "If they have, they'll report back soon." Amara tapped her fingers against the table, her mind racing. "What happens if they don't come back? What happens if—" "They'll come back," Grant interrupted firmly. "Carla and Hernandez know what they're doing, and so do I. If anything goes wrong, I'll make sure you're safe." The radio crackled again, and Grant leaned forward, adjusting the dial. A faint voice came through, distorted but recognizable. "This is Evans. We've located the lab. Repeat, we've found the lab. Proceeding with caution." The twins exchanged a glance, their fear mingled with hope. In the compound, Carla and Hernandez moved deeper into the facility, following a map they'd found in the lab. It led them to a locked door at the end of a long hallway. "Behind here," Carla said, examining the keypad. Hernandez pulled out a small device from his bag, attaching it to the keypad. The device beeped as it cycled through possible codes, finally unlocking the door with a soft click. The room beyond was stark and clinical, its walls lined with monitors displaying streams of genetic data. In the center of the room stood Dr. Rajiv Gupta, his back turned to them as he studied a glowing holographic display. "Dr. Gupta," Carla said, her voice steady but firm. The man froze, then slowly turned to face them. He was older than the photograph they'd seen, his face lined with age and worry, but his sharp eyes gleamed with recognition. "Detective Evans, I presume," he said, his tone calm. "I was wondering when you'd find me." Carla raised her weapon, keeping it trained on him. "Step away from the console." Gupta raised his hands, complying without argument. "You don't need that. I'm unarmed." "That doesn't make you harmless," Hernandez said, his weapon also aimed at the scientist. Gupta smiled faintly. I suppose not. Carla gestured toward the monitors. What are you doing here? What's the purpose of all this? Gupta sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. Project Genesis was never meant to go this far. It was supposed to be about improving lives, eradicating disease. But the people funding it, they had other ideas. They wanted weapons, soldiers, tools. And you just went along with it? Carla demanded. Gupta's expression darkened. You think I had a choice? You think any of us did? They own everything. Our research, our funding, our lives. The moment we signed on, we were trapped. Hernandez stepped forward, his jaw tight. What about the James twins? What did you do to them? Gupta hesitated, his eyes flicking to Carla. They were my greatest success, the only subjects to survive the process without complications. They were perfect. They're not subjects, Carla snapped. They're human beings. I know, Gupta said softly. That's why I tried to help them. I didn't want them to end up like the others. Carla narrowed her eyes. Help them how? By turning them into experiments? No, Gupta said quickly. By sabotaging the program. By helping Belinda escape with them before the final phase. Carla exchanged a glance with Hernandez. Final phase? Gupta's face twisted with regret. The program's backers wanted to activate certain enhancements in the subjects. But the process was untested, dangerous. I couldn't let that happen to them. Back at the safe house, the tension was palpable. Ava paced the living room while Amara sat by the window, watching the forest for any sign of movement. What do you think they're finding? Ava asked, her voice strained. Hopefully something that will stop all of this, Amara replied, her gaze fixed on the tree line. Grant stood by the door, her weapon resting against her shoulder. Whatever happens, we're ready. Ava stopped pacing, looking at Grant. But are we ready for the truth? What if it's worse than we think? Grant hesitated, then said softly, the truth is always better than living in fear. At the compound, Carla and Hernandez escorted Gupta out of the lab, his hands secured with zip ties. As they reached the main corridor, an alarm blared, and red lights flashed throughout the facility. They're coming, Gupta said grimly. Get moving, Carla ordered, her weapon at the ready. Armed guards flooded the hallway, shouting orders. Hernandez fired a warning shot, forcing the guards to scatter. This way, Carla shouted, leading the group toward an emergency exit. They burst out into the open air, the forest stretching ahead of them. Hernandez covered their retreat as Carla dragged Gupta toward their vehicle, which was parked nearby. Ava's voice crackled over the radio. Carla, are you okay? We're coming back, Carla replied, starting the car. We've got Gupta. Stay ready. The candle's smoke lingered in the air as the James family sat together, their laughter filling the room with warmth. For the first time in years, they allowed themselves to feel completely at ease. Belinda leaned back in her chair, her eyes watching her daughters with a mixture of pride and relief. Ava was busy sketching something in her notebook, while Amara flipped through a science journal Carla had brought as part of their birthday gifts. Carla stood by the window, sipping her coffee and taking in the quiet suburban street outside. You've got a good neighborhood here, she said, glancing over her shoulder. The kind of place where you can rebuild. Belinda nodded. It's peaceful, and the neighbors have been kind. They don't ask too many questions, which I think we all need right now. Amara looked up from her journal. Do you think they'll ever stop looking for us? She asked, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of worry. Carla walked over, setting her coffee cup down. With everything we exposed, they'll have bigger problems than coming after you. The public won't let them hide again, not after the footage we released. But if anyone tries, Hernandez added as he stepped into the room, carrying a small toolkit, you've got me and Carla on speed dial. His reassuring grin brought a smile to Ava's face, though Amara's analytical mind couldn't help but calculate the small but real risks that might remain. Belinda reached out to hold her daughter's hands. We've come this far together. Whatever happens next, we'll face it as a family. As the evening wore on, Ava and Amara retreated to their shared bedroom, where the walls were lined with Ava's sketches and Amara's meticulously organized charts and books. Ava lay sprawled on her bed, pencil in hand, while Amara sat at the desk, typing notes on her laptop. "I was thinking," Ava began, her voice soft, "about what Mom said earlier, about exploring our heritage." Amara paused her typing, turning to face her sister. "What about it?" "Well," Ava continued, "I was wondering if it could help us make sense of who we are. Like, really make sense of it. Not just the experiments or the lab stuff, but everything else. Our roots, our history, the parts they couldn't touch." Amara nodded slowly, her logical mind already forming a plan. "It's not a bad idea. If we dig into where we come from, it might help us figure out where we're going." Ava smiled, her creative spirit reignited. "Maybe I could draw what we find, like a visual journal. It could be part of our story, something good that came out of everything." Amara leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "And I could document it, make sure the science and history are accurate. We could work together, like always." "Like always," Ava echoed, reaching out to squeeze her sister's hand. The next morning, the family gathered in the living room, sunlight pouring through the curtains. Carla and Hernandez were there, maps and travel brochures spread out on the coffee table. "This is where we start," Carla said, pointing to a brochure for a cultural center specializing in West African history. "It's close by, and they offer classes on genealogy and traditional art forms." Ava's eyes lit up as she flipped through the brochure. "This looks amazing. I could learn so much about the styles and techniques our ancestors used." "And for you," Hernandez added, sliding another brochure toward Amara. "There's a center focusing on South Asian cultural heritage. They've got a library full of resources on science, mathematics, and philosophy from that part of the world." Amara's expression softened as she read through the information. "This is perfect. It's exactly what I was hoping for." Belinda watched her daughters with a full heart. "We'll start local, but someday we'll visit the places themselves. We'll stand where our ancestors stood and see the world they came from." Carla smiled. "And when that day comes, you know I'll be there to help you plan every step of the way." The following weeks were a whirlwind of new discoveries and quiet moments of reflection. At the West African Cultural Center, Ava learned about traditional patterns, symbols, and stories passed down through generations. Her sketchbook filled with intricate designs and vibrant colors inspired by the textiles and carvings she studied. Meanwhile, Amara immersed herself in the wealth of knowledge at the South Asian Center. She marveled at the mathematical achievements of ancient scholars and found herself drawn to the philosophical teachings that encouraged balance and introspection. Every evening, the family gathered to share what they'd learned. Ava would excitedly show her latest sketches, while Amara explained the historical context behind the symbols. Belinda listened intently, her smile growing wider with each passing day. One evening, as they sat around the dining table, Ava presented her mother with a finished drawing. It depicted their family standing strong beneath a tree with deep roots, its branches filled with symbols from both their cultural heritages. "It's beautiful," Belinda said, tears welling in her eyes. "You've captured everything, our journey, our strength, and our love." Amara leaned over to add, "It's not just a drawing. It's a reminder of who we are and where we're going." The modest James home became a hub of creativity and learning. Neighbors who had once kept their distance began stopping by, drawn by the warmth and resilience radiating from the family. Ava's drawings and Amara's research sparked curiosity, leading to conversations about identity, heritage, and the importance of preserving history. Carla visited often, her presence a comforting reminder of the bond they'd formed during the darkest days of their ordeal. She brought news of the ongoing investigations and updates on the rescued children, many of whom were beginning to rebuild their lives. Hernandez, too, became a frequent visitor, regaling the twins with stories from his time in the field and teaching them self-defense techniques, just in case. One crisp autumn morning, the family decided to take a trip to a nearby park, its trees ablaze with vibrant reds and golds. They packed a picnic basket filled with homemade sandwiches and fresh apple cider, their laughter ringing out as they strolled along the winding paths. Under the shade of a sprawling oak tree, they spread out a blanket and sat together, enjoying the cool breeze and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. Ava sketched the scene, her pencil capturing the joy and peace that had finally become a part of their lives. Belinda leaned back against the tree trunk, watching her daughters with a contented smile. "This is what I dreamed of," she said softly. "A life where we could just be together, without fear." Amara placed a hand on her mother's arm. "And now we have it, because you never gave up on us." Ava added, "And because we didn't give up on each other." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, letting the beauty of the day wash over them. Carla and Hernandez arrived soon after, carrying a small drone they'd brought to capture aerial shots of the park. They joined the family on the blanket, sharing stories and laughter as the afternoon stretched into evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Ava's sketch was complete. It showed their family beneath the oak tree, surrounded by the vibrant colors of autumn, a perfect snapshot of their new beginning. The sun dipped lower as the James family lingered under the sprawling oak tree. The air carried the faint scent of pine and crisp leaves, the perfect backdrop to their newfound peace. Ava carefully closed her sketchbook, her fingers brushing the worn cover as if sealing in the memory forever. Amara glanced over her sister's shoulder, catching a glimpse of the drawing. "That's one of your best yet," she said, her tone filled with pride. "You think so?" Ava replied, her artistic eyes scrutinizing the delicate strokes and soft shading. "Absolutely," Amara assured her. "You've captured more than just how we look. It's how this moment feels." Belinda reached over and rested a hand on each of her daughter's knees. "That's what makes it so special," she said, her voice tender. "You've always had a gift, Ava, not just for seeing what's in front of you, but for capturing the emotions behind it." Ava smiled, her cheeks flushing. "It's because of you and Amara. You're my inspiration." Nearby, Carla and Hernandez stood by the small drone they had been flying. Its tiny camera had captured aerial shots of the family's picnic, the surrounding park bathed in the golden hues of sunset. Hernandez whistled softly as he reviewed the footage on a tablet. "You've got some prime memories here," he said, glancing at Carla. Carla nodded. "These moments are what make it all worth it." Back at the James home, the mood was light as the group prepared dinner together. Carla chopped vegetables at the kitchen counter, while Belinda stirred a pot of fragrant stew on the stovetop. Ava and Amara set the table, their movements synchronized in the way only twins could manage. Hernandez leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the scene with a small smile. "You know, you've got a good thing going here," he said. "A fresh start, surrounded by people who care." Belinda glanced over her shoulder, her smile soft but genuine. "It's more than I ever hoped for," she admitted. "After everything, this feels like a dream." Carla set down her knife and wiped her hands on a towel. "It's real, Belinda. You made it through the hardest part. Now it's about rebuilding, step by step." As dinner wound down, the group gathered in the living room. Carla pulled out her phone, scrolling through updates from the ongoing investigation. "They're starting to unearth more hidden facilities," she explained, her tone serious. "It's slow going, but the pressure from the media is keeping them from burying the truth again." Ava and Amara listened intently, their expressions a mix of hope and determination. "What about the other children?" Amara asked. "The ones who were still in those cells?" Carla nodded. "Many of them are already in safe environments, getting the care they need. Some are with their families, others with foster parents. It's going to take time, but they're on the right path." Ava bit her lip. "I hope they find happiness like we did." "They will," Belinda said, her voice firm with conviction. They're stronger than they know. Later that night, as the house settled into quiet, Ava lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind buzzed with ideas for her next drawing, a piece that would honor not only their journey but also the other children who had been saved. "I can't sleep either," Amara whispered from the other bed, sensing her sister's restlessness. Ava turned her head. "I keep thinking about the kids from the facility. How scared they must have been, how brave they had to be." Amara nodded, her analytical mind racing. "We can't just leave it at that. There has to be something we can do to help them beyond what's already being done." Ava's eyes lit up. "Maybe we could organize something, a fundraiser or an art show. I could display my drawings and you could help with the logistics." Amara's lips curved into a small smile. "That's actually a great idea. We could raise money for their education, therapy, or whatever they need." The twins' quiet brainstorming session stretched into the early hours, their whispered plans weaving a tapestry of hope for those who had shared in their struggles. The next morning, the James family gathered at the breakfast table. Ava and Amara excitedly shared their idea for an art and science exhibit, their enthusiasm infectious. "That's an incredible idea," Carla said, sipping her coffee. "You could partner with the local community center. They're always looking for ways to bring people together for a good cause." Belinda beamed with pride. "You two never cease to amaze me. You're turning something painful into something beautiful." Hernandez leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Count me in for security. Not that you'll need it, but better safe than sorry." Amara's mind was already buzzing with possibilities. "We could create interactive displays about genetics and the importance of ethical research. It would help people understand what went wrong with Project Genesis and why it can't happen again." "And I'll draw portraits of the kids," Ava added. "Something to remind people that they're not just statistics. They're real people with hopes and dreams." Belinda reached across the table, taking her daughter's hands. "This is going to be something special. I can feel it." Over the following weeks, the James family threw themselves into the project. Ava worked tirelessly on her drawings, each piece capturing the resilience and humanity of the children who had been rescued. Amara collaborated with Carla to create educational materials, ensuring the exhibit would be as informative as it was moving. On the day of the exhibit, the community center was filled with people from all walks of life. Families, teachers, reporters, and activists wandered through the displays, their faces reflecting a range of emotions as they absorbed the stories being told. One corner of the room was dedicated to Ava's artwork, her sketches arranged in a gallery-style format. Each piece was accompanied by a brief description written by Amara, detailing the context and significance of the subject. At the center of the exhibit stood a large mural created by Ava, depicting a diverse group of children standing hand in hand beneath a tree with deep roots and wide, sheltering branches. Above them, butterflies took flight, symbolizing freedom and hope. As the evening wore on, visitors approached the family to express their admiration and gratitude. Among them was a young woman who introduced herself as one of the volunteers working with the rescued children. "Your story inspired me to get involved," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Seeing what you've done here gives me hope that we can make a difference." By the time the exhibit concluded, the James family was exhausted but deeply fulfilled. The event had raised significant funds for organizations supporting the rescued children, and the overwhelming response from the community reaffirmed their decision to share their story. As they packed up the remaining displays, Ava paused to take one last look at the mural. Amara joined her, resting a hand on her sister's shoulder. "This isn't the end," Amara said quietly. "It's just the beginning." Ava nodded, a determined smile spreading across her face. "For us, and for them." As they left the community center, the cool night air wrapped around them, carrying the faint hum of distant city lights. Together, they walked into the future, united, unbroken, and ready to keep fighting for the truth. As the James family stepped into the cool night air, their hearts were full of hope and purpose. The success of the exhibit marked not just the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a new mission, to help others heal and to ensure the truth was never buried again. Belinda placed her arms around her daughters, pulling them close. "We've come so far, and I know we'll only keep moving forward." Ava smiled, gripping her sketchbook tightly. "Together, we can do anything." Amara nodded, her analytical mind already considering their next steps. "The world knows the truth now. We'll make sure they never forget." Carla and Hernandez exchanged a glance, their expressions a mix of pride and quiet resolve. They knew their work wasn't finished, but they also knew this family had found the strength to face whatever came next. As they walked down the quiet street toward home, the stars above seemed brighter, their light a promise of better days ahead. For the James family, and for all those they had helped, the future was finally theirs to shape.